Hi there, my name is Henrique Eisenmann, and today we're going to be talking about my favorite piece of all times, the Rite of Spring. I wanted to start with a quote by Stravinsky. That's good artists borrow, but great artists steal. What does it mean to steal, from a composer? Well, I think it's basically trying to adapt, trying to understand what elements there have the potential to be incorporated into your own music. And so this is what I want to do today. I want to investigate the Rite of Spring, trying to identify, you know, textural ideas, harmonic ideas, rhythmic ideas, motivic ideas that we can actually use on our own arrangements. And to use as an example, I'm going to take Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which by coincidence has melodic similarities that, as you will see with the first notes, they're kind of the same. And then we're going to try to apply everything that we can from the Rite of Spring in an arrangement of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And you start to see how suddenly everything changes. The whole sound, the whole idea that you had before will completely be transformed. So without further ado, let's first listen to the arrangement and then we'll explore step by step how to get there, okay? So this is my crazy version of the Rite of Spring, kind of improvised. I basically used parts from the scores that I could remember and some of the little tricks that Stravinsky uses and applied like to the piece. So, as a brief historical perspective, we need to remember that actually today, 107 years ago, the Rite of Spring was premiered in France, in Paris, and it's one of the most polemic, revolutionary pieces of all times, perhaps one of the most important pieces of the 20th century, and not only because of the whole story about the premiere that was filled with problems, but also about the amount of innovations that were introduced on that piece and how it impacted the way other composers started to create music. So the Rite of Spring continues to impress people and continues to shock audiences. More than 80 choreographers have been doing their own take on the Rite of Spring. It became kind of like a landmark piece for choreographers. My favorite one is Pina Bausch, by the way, if you want to check it out. And I have also many other movies and short excerpts and documentaries that talk about this piece if you're interested. Also orchestration analysis and many interesting links. And let's start by talking a little bit about the score and the piece. I'm going to be using my little four-hand score. You should download the four-hand score. It's much easier to follow than the actual, orchestral score. And I think, and this is how Stravinsky originally composed the piece. He wrote the piece thinking about using two pianos, and then he orchestrated the whole thing. So actually, it's a much simplified and easier to digest version. And I think one of the big problems of especially improvisers, jazz improvisers nowadays, is that whenever we're faced with like some sort of a technical challenge or something that looks a little bit too complex, we tend to freeze and not to really investigate. So, perhaps the most important thing out of this whole video is just to encourage you to go search on the score what's happening. Go actually and figure out what's going on harmonically, what's going on rhythmically, and investigate the score. Instead of having just a type of a passive listening, let's change it to an active listening. So, well, let's start. Let's start from the very beginning. I think the first thing that really strikes me is just the fact that you have this melody by itself. And the first note that you introduce is actually a C sharp. So if the beginning was in C major, the first note that is introduced is a C sharp. Now, how would this sound if in case I'm playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Oh, here's my C sharp, okay? So that's the way to basically incorporate that. Every time you have a melody in a specific mode, well, why not? Let's try adding the flat 9 on the bass, or at least a note that's half step above my root, and see the effect. If we move a little bit further, we'll notice that the melody is repeated, but this time I have a fourth. Continuing, it's still half step above, but this time so you have descending chromatic perfect fourths. Maybe I can use the same thing on my Somewhere Over the Rainbow. So this is already pretty cool. Imagine that you can play any piece you want by having this parallel fourths going down chromatically. It's a great effect. And another thing that's important to remember in Stravinsky's music is the concept of stratification, which means when musical events, sometimes they interrupt each other, as in a collage technique. Some people call this musical cubism, where you have multiple perspectives and multiple different parts of melodies interspaced and interrupting each other. And this is basically Stravinsky's favorite technique. And you're gonna notice a lot that many times things are interrupted and immediately you jump to a next section introducing a new theme. In this case, by coincidence, if you take the two notes, those are the notes of Somewhere Over the Rainbow in a different key, but it doesn't matter because when you're dealing with stratification, you can basically bring pieces and beats of melody from other places and from other keys and just stamp them together. So the piece goes on with what I call a lot of rhythmic dissonance. Rhythmic dissonance is when basically rhythms are not fitting each other perfectly in the same grid, when you have multiple things basically happening at the same time, almost like a rhythmic polyphony or polyrhythms if you prefer. And still and it's very complicated to follow. Even if you're trying to follow the score, you're going to see how hard it is. And there are some parts that I really like, and I think if you like a specific part, just go in the score and try to understand what's happening there. So, for example, these chords here that are absolutely incredible. So, this is basically incredible. It's like a type of voice leading that you don't normally find on a regular, jazz piece, for example. Basically, my left hand is going chromatically, and my right hand, and the result is basically the sound. It's basically a B sus chord. This is more of an E flat 6 chord with the B flat on the bass. This is a plain D minor with A on the bass. Back to my E flat 6. And somehow the whole counterpoint or just the way that the voices are written, it's just so rich, so full of ideas. So why not? Let's try to use that on our arrangement. Last time we write an arrangement, I don't know. I can change the chords a little bit. I can try to play my melody using the same type of voice leading. So this is now something that we see a lot that's happening right here is what I call like the bee swarm sound that Stravinsky likes a lot. Is basically he has a melody happening and a pretty straight ahead melody. Stravinsky is always collecting folk melodies and that are very familiar to the ear, but at the same time he's always introducing one element that doesn't really belong there. So it's kind of an intruder, and I like to call this the bee swarm sound. And in this case, as you can see, there's like all of this bunch of, there's a 12 tuplets here. So basically I'm dealing with D mixolydian right here. And on my right hand, I basically have a lot of basically I have a lot of an F mixolydian sound. And on my right hand I have more of the D mixolydian sound. So the result is like this kind of and for me this is a brilliant idea for us to incorporate. And this is what I was trying to do. I decided to play basically the same type of noise. I'm not following exactly the same thing. I'm just creating my own. And then I decided to play in another key the same melody. This way you create kind of like this two-dimensional, at least two-dimensional piece where you have two completely separate things. And it's one way to use some of this rhythmic dissonance because the rhythms really don't align, and at the same time polytonality where you have two different tonalities happening at the same time. This is what Stravinsky uses all the time, in most of his pieces. He has things happening at the same time in different keys. So again, one chord that really strikes me how beautiful it is actually around this part right here. It's just so beautiful. And first he starts with this quartal. It's like almost like chicoria sounding phrase. Followed by, so basically it's an F sharp 7 sharp 11. going into of an E flat mixolydian sound. And you know, again, when I first heard that, I had no idea what was happening in the harmony, or what were those quartal, you know, short phrases. But I had to go through the score and really find those notes and examine those notes, and then I really discovered what was going on. So we get to the most famous part, you know, the augurs of spring, the almonds of spring, or the dance of the adolescents. The part is, that's the famous part that they use to describe polytonality, because you have an E major on the left hand and you have an E flat 7 on the right hand, and together they create this like dark sound, pounding like a tribal dance, you know. And what can we learn from it is the question. Well, first thing is that you can use, you know, chords that are half step away and they sound pretty amazing. Second important thing is you can place accents that are really displacing and not following the expected rhythmic patterns, you know. Ba, on upbeats, ba, ah. So there's this sense of constant surprise going on. So in this case, I think I was in F major when I played this. So I decided to do it very tonal and very beautiful, instead of going into the more dissonant polytonal vibe. So what I'm doing here, I'm just harmonizing more traditionally, like a modern jazz player would do. However, I'm always using a kind of an odd number of beats or repetitions of this chord per chord, and by doing that, I create this sense of tension. You know, you never know when the chord is going to change. Maybe now, no. Now it changed. The accents are displaced, so it creates kind of this sense of like anxiety, but not such a bad anxiety in this case. So. If I want to go to this Stravinsky chord, actually a pretty nice sounding part. And many composers like Brad Mehldau, when they perform, they do a lot of this. You know, comes a little bit from that rock influence of having like many chords, like power chords on a guitar. And Ode 19, for example, Brad's composition has a lot of that. And just another detail that you can see here a lot is this idea of like, this is one of my favorite things, by the way, right after that. You notice that on one voice, he has this constant buzz. That's another B swarm that he's using. But on the right hand, he has that E flat 7 ostinato. So this is a really great texture. What if we can sing a whole song using this as a texture, you know? Somewhere over the rainbow. Woo! It's pretty awesome. And many other parts of this piece, you know, the moment actually you understand that this is what he's actually trying to do, creating like multiple textures that he's overlapping, and many times the textures are not going to fit, and this is how he creates a different type of dissonance, and you are actually going to start enjoying it much more. The piece will start making way more sense, you know. And he goes on like this all the time. Every time he has a mode or something, a melody that is modal and is going in a certain direction, there will always be some note or a trill or some texture that doesn't belong to that chord, just to create some tension. If we move on a little bit, there are other parts in the introduction that use the same technique, but this is another technique that I just wanted to bring up. which comes from a later part in the piece called Spring Rounds or Spring Dances, and sort of also a very famous part of the piece. So basically what's happening here is a pretty simple, easy modal melody in Dorian mode. But here Stravinsky decides to harmonize all those notes using a type of reharmonization called parallel chords over a mode. So basically it's modal parallel chords. What do I mean by that? I choose my initial note and I choose some shape with my hands, you know. In this case I'm playing the third, the ninth, and the fifth here, doubling the fifth down. And instead of thinking about each note, how to harmonize each note, basically he's just taking the same exact shape and moving over. Moving this shape along the E flat minor Dorian scale. And the result is kind of this mystical sound. So in our case, I think I could play in this key, or I could play in I think I played in F major. So I decided to transform this into my shape. Especially this part sounds like Stravinsky. So at the end I'm actually changing a few notes. Instead of playing major, I'm playing more of a Lydian. Instead. Anyways, I'm doing some changes, but you still have that reference from Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and I'm harmonizing it using those, you know, parallel structures. This is a great way for, you know, to reharmonize pieces. Miles Davis uses a lot of that in some of his, you know, later records, and it has that bit of a mystical sound. So these are just some examples of what you can do analyzing the score. There's much more. The piece is long. There's so much information. So I really encourage you to create your own dictionary, your Stravinsky dictionary, where you collect your favorite words, the favorite elements that you really love, and really try to steal it and use it in your own music, you know. And once that's written on your notebook, you feel like you have a little more ownership over that. So instead of listening to contemporary music, especially complicated pieces like this, from this perspective of being in awe and kind of distant, let's try the opposite approach. Actually, you know, touching that piece, investigating what's special about it. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel, and yeah, like the video if you enjoyed, and see you around. Bye.